is Mrs. Hofferberth. Today we're going to talk about density calculations. So in class we've been talking about what density is, and at this point you should have a pretty good feeling for the fact that density is how much mass you have in a particular volume of a material. And so what we're going to do now is turn that into a mathematical equation. And so that equation is D equals M over V, where D is the density, M is the mass, and V is the volume. The units you're typically going to see for the mass are going to be grams in this class. Volume will most often have units either of milliliters or of cubic centimeters. So remember, a milliliter and a cubic centimeter are the same thing. They're both volume measurements. They're actually the same amount of volume. But for liquids, we tend to use milliliters, and for solids, we tend to use cubic centimeters. And since we are taking the mass and dividing it by the volume, our units for density are going to be grams per milliliter or grams per cubic centimeter. These are definitely not the only possible units for density. Any mass divided by volume, whatever those units are, is a density, but those are the ones you'll see most often. Okay, so let's do a problem. So when you have a word problem, the most important thing is to read through and figure out what it's asking and what all the numbers that are there are. That way you know where to plug them in and how to do the problem. So as you look through this problem, you've got the first number that pops out is 24.0 grams. Grams is a unit for mass, which means that this 24.0 grams, that's the mass. And then I've got 12.66 cubic centimeters. Well, that's a unit of volume. So that's the volume, and the question is, what's the density? So that's going to be our unknown. Once you have those pieces, you just need to plug it into the equation and then solve for it. Okay, so since I knew the mass was 24 grams, I put that in the mass spot, which is up on top. And I knew the volume was 12.66 cubic centimeters. I put that in the denominator because that's where the V was. So break out your calculator. 24 divided by 12.66 is 1.8957. There's actually more digits on my calculator. Unit-wise are going to be grams per cubic centimeter, but you have to use significant figures because you don't actually know all of those digits. They don't actually all have meaning in terms of how well you were able to measure the object. So let's go back and take a look at significant figures here. As we look at Sig Figs, again, you're looking at the numbers that you did the math on. And so you're looking at 24.0 and you're looking at 12.66. 24.0 has 3 significant figures. That final 0 is significant because it is a trailing 0 and there's a decimal point in the number. And then 12.66 has 4 significant figures. Well, remember, the rule for division is you want the smallest number of significant figures in your answer that you had in your measurements. So since 3 is less than 4, you need to have 3 significant figures in your final answer. So let's take a look at this final answer and let's round it to 3 digits. So starting with the first non-zero number, I get 3 decimal places. That's where I'm going to have to stop, is after the 9. And so this number is between 1.89 and 1.90. Well, the digits following that 1.89 are 5, 7. It's more than halfway. And so this number, when you go to round it, becomes 1.90 grams per cubic centimeter. Okay, the last one we calculated density. With that equation, density is mass over volume, you can solve for any of those variables as long as you know the other 2. So in this problem, you're going to calculate the mass. And so the mass is our question. And you know its volume is measured to be 258 cubic centimeters, so there's your volume. And the density was 3.64 grams per cubic centimeter. So as you look at this problem, you know which equation you're going to use because it is asking you to calculate the mass and you know the density. So your equation is D equals M over V. And we're going to plug the numbers that we have into this equation. So I know the density is 3.64 grams per cubic centimeter. Don't know the mass, that's the variable. And then the volume is 258 cubic centimeters. That's algebra. Okay, we need to solve for mass. It's in the numerator. I need to get it by itself. So since it is currently being divided by 258, the opposite of division is multiplication. We're going to multiply both sides of this equation by 258. And when we do that, it will cancel out on the right side. We can multiply on the left. And the answer that I'm going to get for this is that the mass is equal to 939.12 grams. Okay, two ways you know the units are grams. First off, it's the mass, the units are grams. Secondly, if you look at the units that you were multiplying on the left side, you had cubic centimeters being multiplied by grams over cubic centimeters. Since the cubic centimeters is both in the numerator and the denominator, that's going to cancel, and so you're left with grams. You need to have 3 significant figures in this answer, and so this is 939 grams for that mass. There's your final answer. So in this final problem, we are going to solve for volume. The question is, what is the volume? I've got 250 grams of liquid mercury. Grams is a unit of mass, so this is the mass. And we know the density is 13.6. Once we have those numbers, we're going to again plug them into our density equation. And at this point, we need to solve for the volume. However, the volume is in the denominator. You may not solve for anything in the denominator. You have to get it out first. So the first thing we're going to do is cross multiply so we can get the volume out of the denominator so we can solve for it. As you start to do this, just remember that the 13.6, it doesn't look like a fraction, but it's just over 1. Once you have the volume out of the denominator, now you can solve for it algebraically just simply by dividing by what it's being multiplied by, which is that 13.6 grams per cubic centimeter. Okay, so I did the math here. Solved for the volume, noted that I only needed 3 significant figures in my final answer, and rounded for a final answer of 18.4 cubic centimeters. So at this point in time, hopefully you are familiar with what the density equation is, and you feel like you'll be able to look at a word problem, identify what the numbers in that word problem are, plug them into the density equation, and solve for your unknown. And we're going to have lots of chances to practice that in class, but of course.